Okay, I think we could get started, Ellie.
Yeah, sure thing.
Yeah, just so that you know, we're recording this for sharing on our website in the future, but you'll feel free to, not have your video on. And if you, actually, Ellie, are you going to just take questions at the end, or do you want questions?
Yeah. Yeah, I think just questions at the end, but if anyone wants to ask something about what I'm talking about, I'm happy for people to interrupt and
Okay, great.
just say it, just unmute yourself and say it rather than put it in the chat or whatever, that's fine.
Brilliant. But I guess if you don't have a question, if you could stay muted, that would be really helpful. Thank you. So I'll just introduce Ellie, and then she'll talk for about 25 minutes, and then we'll have questions at the end. So actually, Ellie or Eleanor?
Oh, Ellie is fine, thank you. I'll answer to either though.
Ellie is a participatory artist and illustrator living in Bristol and working around the world, recently spending a year in Vietnam. Debate around sustainability, urban change, what it means to be a woman, and notions of community underpin her creative practice. Ellie's work responds to and challenges public, urban, and socio-political tensions through encouraging and engaging the general public and a diverse range of community groups, from people with dementia to school children or refugee women, amongst others. In this talk, Ellie will introduce her creative practice and share learning from over 10 years of creatively engaging communities. Ellie will invite you to reflect on what it means to work with others in your creative practice. So over to you.
Jess. It sounds so nice with you reading it rather than just me writing my own about. It's very nice, thank you. All right, let me share my screen and we will begin. Can everyone see that all right? Oh, it's loading. There we go. All right, so yeah, thank you to Bricks as well for inviting me to do this talk today. So I'd like to share a few bits of learning basically from my creative practice, with the hope that it might help inspire others and maybe influence some of the ways you work creatively with communities as well. So my practice has kind of divided, I suppose, a little bit over the last year or so. As mentioned, I lived in Vietnam last year, and I was interested in exploring illustration and pattern design and fabric design, and kind of developed that side of my practice much more when I was there. And also spent the year on the left panel here as some projects I was part of in Vietnam, where I was exploring more site-specific installation and projects which actually didn't necessarily have a participatory or social process to them, but maybe have an interactive or social element to the installation itself. So these are these kind of new strands of work that have been developing more recently, but I'll talk a bit about how I got to that point. So my first bit of learning, I suppose, is to remember the early days, to look back on what worked and why you became interested in social practice or working with communities. So for me, that was working on this piece, which was my degree showpiece back at Chelsea College of Art in London. This was in 2011. And I was really interested in the different communities that I crossed through, and also was part of myself, these kind of transient communities as a student community, and also what it means to be a Londoner. So I started to work with different community groups around South London, and I love the market stalls that you get, which are like these tourist market stalls with, you know, Union Jack hats and umbrellas and all these different things. And I wanted to make an alternative market stall which kind of represented London from a local's perspective. So these different pieces, they're all sort of different mini artworks within this installation of the market stall. The stall itself was a Victorian market stall dragged over Lambeth Bridge from Lower Marsh, where I lived around the corner of at the time. So you can see on the left this postcard stand. This was a project with a youth group, inviting them to take photos of things a tourist would not take photos of around Embankment and around the London Eye. And we printed them into these postcards. We made these I hate hoodies, which are things that people voted that they hated in London about their local area, like tower blocks, chicken and chip shops, roadworks, etc. Change, one of them says. And I was really interested in always asking people both sides of the question of what do you love and what do you hate. And I'm interested in notions of community consultation and what that means and how it can be done in a genuine and more engaging way. And then the t-shirts along here, these are all photos of local shop owners from Lower Marsh, from the neck down. So you could wear a local with these t-shirts. And then the umbrellas were done with an older persons group to draw alternative skylines of London, of like their local pubs and buses, and I think this is like a dance club and various different things to show just these multiplicities of identity of being a Londoner. So that kind of led on to my first residency. This was in 2012 at a community centre and church called Pembroke House, which is in Elephant and Castle in London. And I was invited to, the funding basically was around bringing different communities together, particularly bringing different religious communities together. But I felt that that was too much of an invasive question to ask people about their religious background kind of just off the bat as an outsider and as an artist. So instead I was trying to think of these kind of common denominators of what could bring people together. And I happened to go to the Museum of Childhood just in passing one day. I was meeting someone in the area and thought, oh, I'll just pop in. And just thought that play is such a uniting experience of any culture, class, religion, any backgrounds throughout time, age. It was so uniting. So I decided to do this play swap residency where I was inviting people to contribute and share street games from their childhood. And this was a way to ask people to write down a game and explain how it was played in these kind of little archival sheets that I gave out. And at the same time, that opened up the conversation to ask someone where they were from in a much more gentle way. So yeah, I used a market stall here to collect street games and publicise the project. I ran play workshops from the community centre, made a short film about it with the help of local children, as you can see on the left. And we had a launch event where we played games and added to this kind of archive that we'd collected over about 6 months of the residency. And that archive is now in the Southwark Local History Archive. So I thought it was really nice that that kind of went full circle and actually became this kind of document that you could refer to see what people in Southwark at that time would have played in their childhood. So another key bit of learning for me has been reflecting on what works. So I took the opportunity to do this through my master's, which was in sustainable development in practice. This was at UWE back in 2016. And going from a fine art BA to a sustainable development master's was quite a shift, being around social scientists and environmental practitioners, and all sorts of other people who'd come from different backgrounds, which was an amazing mix actually of students on the course. But I wanted to use this opportunity to really reflect on my own practice. At the same time, I was working at Bristol City Council in community development. So I was getting trained in asset-based community development, which is essentially going into a community and asking them what exists in the community, what the social infrastructure is, what the physical infrastructure is, what the kind of rhythms and routines are and the assets that could be potentially used and improved by the community themselves rather than an outsider. So your role is really to just spark things happening, which the community can then lead. So I wanted to reflect on that in relation to my own practice and came up with this toolkit of recommendations following lots of different interviews with sustainability professionals, community facilitators and community development workers, and artists who are working around climate resilience as well. So I'll run through them very quickly. So the first one is to listen to the community and ask what they can do. And this is so important. I think so often as artists or as community practitioners, we can often presume that we know what a community might need according to reports on it or according to a lack of funding in the area or, you know, indices of multiple deprivation or all these other kind of resources that only paint one side of the picture of a community. So the first thing is to listen to them and see what they want to do. The second thing, I think, as an artist, is really important to gain permission from the residents themselves, build trust, participate and share your story. So part of the building trust is relationship building. It's obviously an essential part of working with communities. Participating in the project yourself. In my creative work, I always contribute myself, like with the play swap project, I'll be making, writing down my own games from my childhood and talking about them with participants and making sure that I'm sharing my own background, history and story with them. So it's not a kind of one-way exchange of information. The third is provoke curiosity through the artwork. What is your hook? Some social practitioners or artists might not like that term of a hook for an artwork, but I do think there's some value in it of what is the invitation, how are you going to get people involved if that's your intention, and what kind of curiosity, what kind of thing might provoke that curiosity, whether it's something visual and bold moving through a public space or a temporary event or something which is unusual in the local area which might jolt people from a usual routine. And this number 4 is share and build climate knowledge collectively. Importantly, I think going into communities, whether it's climate knowledge or any kind of knowledge with research or anything else, is to make sure that's a collective building and it's not the expert going into the community and vice versa, making sure that it's actually exchanged and talked about together. Number 5 is partnering with others and building your support network. A lot of the artists I spoke to through this research talked about burnout and not having a support beyond the straightforward kind of commission of the project they'd been working on. So I think it's really important to come together with other artists or other organizations, to reach out to people if you feel you need help with something, and to not be afraid of asking for help as well. Number 6 is know it's okay to just be an art project, but be aware of your role. I think so often social and community-led projects can be funded as a way to smooth tensions in the community or to kind of paper over the cracks of something else which might have had an impact there. So I think it's really important to do your research on the history of the community and try and be aware of whether your work is being used in that way potentially, or how it might reflect on, say like an urban development in the area which might not have been well received and that kind of thing. Number 7 is aim for the artwork to be environmentally, ethically and economically sustainable. And these are the 3 E's in sustainability. And I think I felt like when I was studying sustainability, I was like, well, of course, the environmental side is something I'll think about a lot and still do. But actually the economic side as an artist, I think is really important to remember as well, that we can't maintain our practice if we're not getting paid. We can't take on work for nothing or work beyond the limits of a project. So actually, I think that's equally as important as making sure your materials are well sourced and ethically it is appropriate for that community. Number 8 is catalyze, even in a small way. I think I personally always put a lot of pressure on myself to try and have a big impact, and especially around climate change, making sure that you really are able to actually influence people's behaviours. But actually, as an artwork, that is not a behaviour change campaign, and it doesn't have to be. It's a different thing, and it can just be about changing someone's mind about one thing. And I think that's still worth it as an artwork if that happens. Number 9 is evidence your impact, but know why and who for. And similarly to being aware of your role, knowing what funders or what your commissioners are looking for in terms of attendee numbers or demographics, and if you can, finding out how that's going to be used and how it's going to be reported on, I think is really vital. And number 10, finally, is to have hope. I think this is so important in this very trying time that we're living through at the moment, to try and maintain that where possible, and hopefully through these other things to gather support around you, to be around like-minded people and to work in interesting ways. That hope can be maintained. So this project, in terms of reflecting on what works, this project was one of the first ones where I really felt I had a really kind of consistent structure and a sort of offer for a social project working with communities. So I was invited to do a mural for this wall, and I'm not a mural artist at all, but I happened to meet someone who worked for an insurance firm, as it happened, who had a corporate social responsibility connection to an Age UK day centre in Southwark in London. And she asked me to do this mural, and I said I'd love to get involved, but I'd love to make it a participatory project if possible. And they hadn't done that kind of thing before. They were really just looking for like a quick fix project, and didn't know what they were taking on, I think, when I started. But we developed this really lovely project with older people at the centre, many of whom had dementia, and I invited a local school to get involved, a girls' school, and so Year 7 students from this girls' school came over to the centre, and we did a whole series of different workshops together, exploring time from the different perspectives. So we did things like sharing your favourite song through time, and it was really lovely because these questions brought out commonalities between these Year 7 girls and the older people. So one of them had, or two of them had the same favourite song, Amazing Grace, which was really lovely. So it's just always trying to find these questions to kind of cut through those divides between age, race, etc. We also shared favourite food, and then we brought in objects to show favourite memories. This object this woman's pointing to is a thimble that her daughter gave her. It says mother on it, and she drew this. And it's also important for me in my practice to show the kind of the hand of the people who've co-created the work with me in the final piece. And this project was again one of the first ones which demonstrated that. So the lines are really direct. I've just digitized the drawings that the community made, and then made them into these repeating patterns. And even the color palette came from a drawing that one of the older residents did, and she'd selected those colors together. So really trying to get all those details in. And part of this, we also made a time capsule that's buried in front of the mural that if I'm around when I'm 77, I'll go and unveil, go and dig it up. Similarly, here in Bristol, this project was a residency I did at Null West Media Centre. And again, around bringing pattern and fabric design into the work and looking at how to make products which perhaps could be used, or resources which people could learn how to make. So I proposed collecting drawings from residents to co-create souvenirs for Philwood. And this was exhibited at Null West Media Centre and in Philwood Community Centre. So I made these leaflets on the right, asking people to draw little doodles in black ink of things and objects relating to the past, present and future of Philwood. It's the 80th anniversary of the community centre at the time. So that was what kind of inspired the project. And then I took those drawings and made them into these repeat patterns. So you can see on the right image, this kind of futuristic skyline is this fabric. There's a big building. I think it's a tea factory. So that was, yeah, it was really fun. And then we made all these different fabrics. I made a kind of open source swatch book, so people can actually access the patterns and then get them printed and print their own things. And then we also ran lots of different sewing workshops where we showed people how to make cushions and making a pattern for these little toys and lampshades and things like that. So I'm really keen as well in my work to help share skills, to learn what the community might find useful and try and respond to that as I propose projects. So importantly, exploring what you enjoy, I think, is really essential as well. In this project, I worked with refugee women from Iraqi Kurdistan and Syria as part of a University of Bristol public engagement project led by Dr. Emma Williamson. And this project was all around, the research was around gender-based violence. And again, similar to the religious question, I didn't want to invite a group of women together and then just talk about gender-based violence right off the bat. It didn't seem appropriate. I wasn't comfortable doing it. The researchers were not asking that of us, but those were the themes that they were exploring. So we wanted to find more gentle ways to open up those conversations. So one of them was, in the first workshops, I rolled out 2 big rolls of wallpaper either side of the room, and invited the group to just make marks representing how they felt as a woman in Bristol and how they felt as a woman in their home country. and just invite them to just see what came out of that. And you can see in the bottom image here, that's the woman drawing how she feels in Bristol, and this represents her journey, and the black marks are the kind of points of trauma within that journey, and significant moments. And all sorts of things came out of just this very kind of open initial question, which really helped us to get to know the group and to understand where they were coming from without asking them to, I don't know, fill in a form or do anything kind of more structured. And it also enabled the group to engage as much or as little as they wanted. It wasn't about you know, completing an activity. It was just make marks if you want, and don't if you don't want to. We'll drink tea together and have a chat. And there was a crash, and you know, it was just trying to make a welcoming environment for us to play. And actually, one of the comments one of the women said was that we'd allowed them to play like children, and that was just really, really lovely to have made a space where that was possible. So the outcome of the piece, this was a collaboration with a poet and writer, Sian Norris, and she wrote a piece of short fiction and co-led the workshops with me. So she did poetry and creative writing, and I did embroidery and drawing workshops. So you can see on the left image, these figs are drawn by some of the group. Two of them were artists in their own right as well. One of them drew these like walnut leaves, and I incorporated that onto this fabric design, which was then digitally printed. And then the text along these side cushions is a whole kind of wedge of poetry from the group. And I wanted it to be one of those things that you have to really get up close to read the poems. And even then, they're not easy to decipher. And it was, you know, that was partly how I felt doing the project. You know, we were right up close talking to these women, and still we had no idea of the, you know, it was just the tip of the iceberg of the experience, of course, that they'd lived through. And then the one on the right is the fabric, which represents their experience being in Bristol. So you can see the words that they'd written. Again, this was their exact handwriting, saying just a housewife or a mum, difficult to fit in, low-key jobs, being inside, etc. And this image of a washing up sponge, which came to represent the kind of monotony of domestic life in Bristol, and having lost their careers and lost their jobs. The woman who brought in that sponge had previously been a film director and a very famous actress in Kurdistan. So she had completely changed, her identity basically had completely changed in this transition. Oh, the exploring what you enjoy part of that was fabric design. So this in Love Letter to Radstock, this was a recent project, started in February this year and then kind of delayed with the COVID first lockdown at the beginning of this. And then we recently completed it just before this coming lockdown. But I've really got into map making and map design and illustration living in Vietnam. And it was lovely to bring that into this project where we invited local people to write love letters to the town. We worked with lots of different local groups and did a kind of public call out for these letters, and had a library, post box in the local library where people could deposit them. And then we selected 10 of them to be part of this trail, and they were printed on vinyl, wrapped like aluminium panels and installed around the town. And then this little map just shows the these little stamps of where the letters are installed. So it's a kind of walking trail to help people explore the town a bit more and some green space locally. So it was really nice to just embed that in the project process, and that's now become part of something I can offer as part of my practice. This was also another project that we managed to just sneak in summer. This was commissioned by Take Apart, and it was came from a resident's request around reinstating a local community carnival that used to happen in the area in the 60s. This is down in Plymouth. And so we did a kind of mini part of the carnival, which was basically these banners that were co-designed in a workshop with the community. You can see in the bottom right corner. So they could design their own banners. And then I again took those little icons and various things they designed and made them into these repeat patterns, and used the slogans people had written to print these banners. And then we also added tags on with these kind of coordinating stickers, so that as we walked around, people could then write on their own comments around these different themes like wildlife, living here, sea life, local views, and foraging. So it was a really nice way to just invite more people to take part as the project was actually going on. Another really key thing that I've learned over the years is the importance of connecting with your own community. For me, being interested in communities, as I said at the beginning, with being part of a transient student community in London, I think I've been striving to kind of find out what my own community is over the years. And a few years ago, I took part in a local arts trail, which is a kind of odd thing for participatory artists to do, because I didn't really have anything to sell per se. But it was really nice to just connect with neighbours and to a local art community as well, of different people showing their products and opening their homes for people to come and see what they've been making. So I was able to exhibit the chairs that I'd made with the refugee women. And it also actually had it as an opportunity to ask people to respond to another artwork I was making and take part in that, which were these honest protest signs, asking people what they'd really want to say in a protest if they thought no one would judge them. That was mine. I'd rather be at home. So it was really nice to actually get people to take part throughout it. And I also had this big heart I've used in lots of different projects around. I'd also do like consultation on public realm projects, asking people what they love and hate about an area. So I thought this would be a nice thing to ask, how do you nurture yourself? And we collected responses throughout that as well. Also, connecting with online communities has been a big new strand for me this year. I've started teaching on Skillshare, which is a kind of video tutorial website, basically. And it's been really nice to connect to a global audience. And even though I don't really see this as part of my social practice specifically, it has enabled me to have lots of really interesting social interactions with people all over the world. And I'd really recommend it as a way to, hopefully kind of develop a passive income. And just now this video is out, I've been receiving royalties each month from Skillshare, and it's a really nice way to connect with a wider audience and hopefully receive a bit of cash on the way as well. And the final recommendation I would share is to look after yourself first. I think especially in these trying times, especially working in social practice or in environmentalism or anything, looking after yourself first is so important to avoid burnout and to make sure that you're well looked after and nurtured, so that you can put the best into your practice as well. And this final project is a piece I did in the first lockdown, where I was really needing to get out of the house to avoid going mad. And I went to start climbing trees, and this is called self-isolating in trees. And so I was climbing trees on Troopers Hill, my local nature reserve, and taking a short video looking up in each tree. And then just taking a moment, maybe before that, just taking a moment to be mindful and just kind of become aware of different senses and just take a moment to feel connected to it. And then I just did a short bit of text on that reflection and plotted them on a map. And this was not really a participatory project, but it exists as a kind of zine in the form of a Google Slides doc. So it's online and videos can be embedded into it. But it has a kind of call to action and an invitation for others to participate afterwards. But it really didn't matter to me whether people did or not, which I think was quite nice. I think sometimes it's quite nice to just put the participatory social practice to the side and explore what you feel drawn to as yourself as an artist. That's it. Thank you. Thanks, Maria. Any questions?
Thanks, Ellie. That was great. Do you want? Brilliant. Thank you. That was really interesting to get an overview of your practice and also to get some top tips, which is always welcome. Does anyone have a question to start off for Ellie? If you want to unmute yourselves.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Well, I really liked your work, particularly working with the community and with the murals and the refugees. You've sort of answered the question I was thinking about, because working with communities is a big part of your work. and I guess you've had to adapt your and you've come up with new ways of working, and I think that's kind of, you know, really good. And do you think you would have done these things if it wasn't for the current situation we're in, you know, and like with lockdown?
Yeah, I think probably not. I mean, with Skillshare, that really came from basically all my projects stopping in the first lockdown and everyone just thinking, oh, retreat, no participation is allowed. So yeah, I did have some time, and also I'd only got back from Vietnam in December last year, so I started these projects in January, February, and then it all just stopped. So yeah, I was thinking, oh, what are these other ways I can reach people and, you know, try and develop some new strands to my work. So that was definitely a result of this year's lockdown. But the other ones, I think the other ones are more or less in line with my general approach, and I've been able to adapt and yeah, do things online. I was hosting like a virtual craft club with a friend as well, and also just teaching online. I was surprised that actually the feedback from participants via Zoom and the sort of buzz I suppose you get from running a workshop actually can exist online. And with Skillshare initially, I was really not enjoying just filming myself in a room by myself and not having any feedback or response. But then you get it later when people start responding and completing their projects, and then you can feedback on their work and kind of help them get through the videos and things. So that was really nice. So it's definitely been a shift in what I expect of participation as well over this year. But
So
yeah, I've been
really you've turned it into new opportunities then. It's like an opportunity
yeah,
to try other things.
yeah, definitely. And yeah, getting back to doing my own work as well was really nice, with my own kind of self-led non-participatory work. And I'd like to do more of that and bring that into my practice in a bit more of a balanced way as well, because I think sometimes you do need a break from trying to gather the troops and engage people all the time. Yeah.
Good.
Hi, Maria.
Wait, I was muted. Hi, Ellie. I have a question around just like when you are doing projects and like obviously like someone brings the money in and then like an agenda. How have you ever encountered like some agendas that you were conflicting for you, because you were mentioning about like ethical, like in all the process, and I you mentioned university as well, and I know sometimes from the researcher's point of view they can be quite pushy with certain aspects, and I was wondering how you dealt with these situations.
Yeah, it can be really challenging. I think now that I'm at this kind of stage in my work and have experienced different situations, I feel like I'm more confident to be able to say no if I don't feel that my values align with a commission, or if I don't feel that something is appropriate or not. I mean, that one that I talked about, the play swap project with the kind of bringing religious backgrounds together agenda. There was a really awful example of I won't name the funder, but the funder came to take some photos of me doing the project, and I was like, well, I'm doing a talk today, it's not really the general workshops, but you can come to that. And I happened to be talking to some people outside the talk venue, and the funder turned up with their photographer, and we're like, oh great, this is perfect. And it happened to be the people I were talking to were non-white and were people of color, and I knew that we all knew this was a photo opportunity to show how diverse the project was, and it was just awful. It was so awkward, and I was completely put on the spot and couldn't say, this is not a situation I want to be in, this is manufactured. The people I was talking to weren't even part of the project anyway. So yeah, but I think, I mean, at the time I was like 23 doing that project, and I think now I would not accept that, and I would say, actually, can we steer this towards the participants who have been involved, and you can come at another time and things like that. But that really stuck in my mind as just a bad example. Like, how dare they do that? It was so awful. But yeah, generally when I apply for commissions or work with researchers, it's because I feel like I have shared values with them and want to explore what they're already exploring. but again, I think having worked with different communities, you can steer it and try and advise people if they haven't come from that background on you know, just appropriate ways to bring people together that might be a bit more welcoming, or yeah, I don't know, sorry, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, it does.
Okay, good.
It's really complicated.
It is, yeah.
I just wanted to hear your opinion. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Maria. Oh, hi, Jack.
Hey, Ellie. Yeah, I guess I loved hearing about that run through of all your different sides of your practice. But
Thank you.
I guess one of the questions that came to me was just when you're working with vulnerable communities or communities with vulnerable people, there's such a scope of complex issues that could be brought up. I was just wondering about whether there's any training you've undertaken, or how you feel about the kind of the depth of complexity that could come up in those sessions.
Yeah, it's a huge issue, and something that I'm still kind of mulling over and trying to figure out as I go through my work. But I mean, when I was working at the council, we did have a lot of training on working with people with protected characteristics and vulnerable communities, and you know, being aware of extremist behaviour and things like that, and general training like dementia training and things, and early years training, that kind of stuff in various different but that's all been in part-time employment that I've had over the years. So no, I've never undertaken, you know, specific training as a freelance artist or as an individual. And I think it's something that really, I mean, working with refugee women, for example, you take on so much and you hear so much and you don't know what you're going to hear. And through making these kind of open, safe spaces for other people, you can make yourself unsafe in that, you know, in that context. So it's something that I'm constantly talking to other artists about and constantly trying to figure out, really, of just how to protect yourself from those barriers. I think when it has been in a commissioned environment, like with No West Media Centre, for example, a young boy shared some information with me that I felt, I thought he was in a vulnerable situation, was able to share that with them, and they had the infrastructure to deal with it. So that's good when you know that you're supported by the commissioner. But yeah, going solo can be dangerous, really. It can be vulnerable. There's not really a set answer for it, but it's just kind of seeing the warning signs, I suppose. And I feel like now I'm able to kind of see if something might be happening, or trying to respond to people and put things in place before anything bad happens.
Thanks,
Jack.
It is really complicated.
Yeah, there's no answer, I'm afraid.
But it just does go to show how important it is, though, for artists working in that context to actually be properly supported and have a really good amount of training before they start a project. Because you know, often if you're, you know, like you were saying, when you were 23, that's really young to you know, you probably wouldn't have amassed a wealth of experience to know how to deal with all sorts of different situations and people.
Yeah. And especially with those kind of hierarchies of power as well. I mean, that was in front of like this head of this funding organization and this photographer, also who happened to both be two older white men. And then there was just me being like, I don't really know how to deal with this. But yeah, now I would definitely not have dealt with it like that. But you know, we're all learning, aren't we?
Oh, I think, Alice, have you got a question?
I keep forgetting the whole unmute malarkey. Firstly, can I say, Ellie, fantastic talk, and I'm, you know, seriously impressed with your work, especially for someone so young. I mean, it's really, I don't mean that patronising, I just think, wow.
Thank you.
Personally, I really loved, the work with the refugee women. I found that very moving. And then I loved your personal reflections in the trees. I loved the mixture of your outward looking work, and then that you showing us something that was a bit more inward looking. So that was lovely. I also love the idea of the word co-create. I might nick that. I love
it's widely used, it's not mine.
I know, but it was really lovely hearing that with your work. You know, it really brought it it really brought it to life, and I could really see that the foundation behind the word, if you know what I mean. I could see you in the work with those communities. with regard to that thing of being prepared for working with different groups of people, particularly vulnerable people. I work with young people, and it's interesting you, Jack, asked about that training, because I haven't technically had any training, and I realise I do rely on my life experience a lot. I mean, I'm you know, I've got my DBS, whatever. Presumably, do you have to be DBS checked for things that you're doing?
I have got one, but only because it was necessary for one commissioner. But basically, no, which is crazy as well.
And then, funny enough, I did you know, I did helping with care packages in lockdown, and I had to do sort of a bit of training. But it's interesting, Jack, you asked that question, because generally I don't think there is enough training. You know, I don't think there is, and I was quite surprised, you know, on the, you know, when I've kind of looked stuff up myself, and I've thought, oh, do I know that? And do I know to ask that? And make sure that you don't promise people that you'd keep secrets, or that you'd, you know, and that you do know to pass things on, or even like in the moment of being put in that awkward position of having that photo taken, you don't always know. Even though maybe in the back of your mind you might have known you felt uncomfortable, it's very hard in those moments to be able to respond really quickly, isn't it?
Yeah, and it is just a moment. It's so quick, and you're like, oh God.
And people are very manipulative. They want that classic photo, you know.
Yeah, it went straight on their website, that picture.
It just,
yeah.
So I feel for you, and I don't think it's your. I mean, yes, I rely on my life's experiences to a certain extent, but I could have easily been put in that position.
Yeah.
You know.
I think the climate has also changed now. I mean, that was, well, eight years ago, and I think now people are a lot more aware on all sides. I think funders are more aware. I think the public is more aware. I think photographers and, you know, people documenting projects are more aware. So I like to think that wouldn't happen in such an obvious, horrible way now. but
I still think those moments on websites are looked for, and
of course, yeah. I mean, and you know, I look for them myself as well. You know, it goes all ways. Like, I am looking to show, you know, people at a workshop who are interacting and engaging with something and hopefully learning things from each other, and that does come across in a similar way. But you just have to do it very gently and very carefully, and, you know, as carefully as you can.
But your engagement with your work is so authentic. It's really impressive, and you know that comes across. So
thank you. Thanks, Alice. That's really lovely to hear. And the co-create word you were talking about as well is interesting, because that's been something that I've noticed come to the fore more recently. I don't know if I maybe wasn't so aware of it, but back when I started out doing participatory work, the term co-create was not really used as much. It was more about participation, and I think even the word participation implies doing too, even though, or an invitation to come into something that's been made. But actually co-create is a bit more like making something together. So I am trying to kind of shift into that, and actually, rather than refer to people who take part in my projects as participants, they are now co-creators. But of course, that does bring up all sorts of other issues around money and payment and, you know, acknowledgement and crediting and so many other things.
Good point.
So, yeah. Jo, did you have a question?
I was going to ask a question, or is it interesting to ask you about the kind of lifetime of projects, and thinking about your point about the importance, obviously, of building trust and relationships with the groups that you're working with, and then what are your thoughts on kind of what happens when you then reach the end of a project, and what does that mean in terms of whether you continue that relationship or not? Could you say a bit about that?
Yeah, this is also a big theme that I've thought a lot about over the years. And actually my thesis that I shared with the toolkit I shared with you guys just now was from the master's, but for my undergrad, I was writing about the role of temporary public art in urban regeneration. And the issue of legacy came up a lot in that research, and was something that I've tried to be aware of, at least in all my work. So the legacy is, you know, the legacy of the actual output, as it were, the actual physical art object, if there is one, is one thing. But then, yeah, the relationships is something else. And I think there's an element of having to draw your boundaries around yourself when you're working with communities, which I've tried to maintain. I mean, the project with refugee women was a real learning curve on that, because we set up Sean, the collaborator, and I had set up a WhatsApp group for the women to get together around the project, and we set it up because we were running the project, so we were like, we'll set it up and then hand it over and it'll all be great and they'll get to know each other and then, you know, great. And yeah, that was really naive, I think, of us to presume, and it actually just meant that we were just kind of on call, basically. Like, we were just constantly chatting to this group all the time, and we were only commissioned for 4 workshops, so it was a really short-term project. So that was one where I really had to actually retreat back and just say, actually, my role here is as an artist. I wanted to make a space where we could make something meaningful together. I think that has happened, but now I'm, you know, I must leave. I must leave this project. So yeah, it is a bit of trying to be aware of that. But I think in terms of the legacy of the pieces as well, with all my work, I give it to the community, so I don't kind of hold any of my own art objects, as it were. So the banners, for example, various other things, even if they're not permanently installed, and I try and design them as well in a way that they wouldn't get outdated quickly, or they wouldn't have dates on them, or maybe even the title of a project on it. So those banners, and I've used banners a lot in my work, where the community could then maybe use them for their own public engagement work or evaluation work or various other things. And it's interesting because having done more illustration recently, you know, that's basically licensing the use of something, but I'm not licensing the use of it, I'm just kind of giving it away, and then it's used in a way that the original artwork was not intended, but I kind of have intended it in the sort of, I don't know, the kind of subtext of it. It's kind of okay for me to be used like that. But yeah, it's funny thinking about it now, having learned a bit more about illustration and art licensing, when you think you're giving an art object away for it to be reinterpreted in different ways beyond your control. But that's something you have to just let go, let it happen. Yeah.
That's great, thank you.
Ellie, I had a question around whether you've come up against either finding it difficult to engage with a community that you're working with, or having less of a uptake than you were expecting, and how you've had to be adaptive in those situations.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely happens. I can't remember who I was talking to the other day, but I was saying there should be like a word for the sadness of like participatory artist or like community person waiting for participants to turn up who never show. I don't know what that word is. Maybe I'll invent one. But yeah, we've definitely been there. I mean, it's often where I can remember examples of it, it's actually been in employed roles, working for education programs and various things, where actually I felt that the intention of the program wasn't quite right or wasn't quite aligned with the community. I'm not saying it doesn't ever happen in my own work. I'm sure it has, but the things that spring to mind first are not that. I was working on an education program back in London for Cubic Gallery, and we did one. It was a great program, but we did one project on a local estate where it hadn't really come from the community. It kind of was like squishing it into another program and another bit of funding, and like no one's heart was in it. Basically, the community's heart wasn't in it. Our heart wasn't really in it. Even like the you know, person who'd originally initiated the program, it didn't quite gel. And then actually we had some money left over from the program, and commissioned an illustrator or an animator to put a little video together of all the outputs from it. And she was like, this looks like an amazing program, looks like it's gone really well. But it's just that thing of like being able to take a good photo of like the couple of people who turned up, and it still shows that something happened and something came together. But yeah, we didn't feel like that happened. But yeah, I think, I mean, a key term I think in community development is going where the spark is, and that's what we're often taught in asset-based community development. And I think as artists we can also take that on board of, you know, is that need and desire there? Is a community that you're part of or that you'd like to work with looking for something like that to happen? And maybe like trying out a smaller version of it, or kind of, yeah, and just walking around and meeting people. I mean, the project I did in I didn't show it today, but I did a similar map project where I was illustrating a kind of history trail around Kingsholm in Gloucester. And I just used the community development sort of technique of just walking the streets, chatting to people, was invited into people's houses and just got to know people. Again, the DBS check and vulnerability thing, a bit of an issue, but it felt safe and I was just like, oh, I'm going with my gut, it's fine. But from that, I was then able to find really interesting facts from local people about local history and these stories and characters that I then illustrated and then stuck on vinyl in these windows of some homes of people I talked to and like a local cafe that I'd spoken to and various different people. So it was a really nice way to kind of build up a community-led project, even though I was actually the one drawing the work and installing it, but the content had come directly from community conversations. So I think it's just, making sure you can bed that in at every possible stage. And if not, you have to adapt and approach it from a different angle. So it's, no social project is ever perfect, definitely. But yeah, you can adapt.
Thanks. Does anyone else have any questions?
I'd be interested, if there aren't any others, I'd be interested to know what's next, what you're working on now, or have you got anything?
Well, I've just finished this week installing a project at We the Curious, which I'm really excited about. And this is also like a very different strand really from my own practice in that it's a permanent museum piece, it's part of the Science Centre. And it's a piece, it's like a wall of hourglasses which you can spin. And they've got different facts about the sustainability of sand on each side. And that was from a connection with Avonmouth. Actually, it did come from a sort of participatory impetus. So I did go out and talk to Avonmouth sand aggregates guys about the sand dredging process in the area and where sand's used in Bristol. And it's really fascinating. I had no idea about sand before this project. But yeah, that's been really exciting. And for that project, I was also working with a fabricator and was able to actually build things in a much more complex way than, usually I would use fabric or found objects and things like that. So it's been a really interesting kind of, it feels like a next stage of my practice really, and I'd like to do more of work like that, which is site specific, sustainability related and interactive, with a participatory kind of background. So yeah, hopefully more work like that in the future, we'll see.
That sounds amazing. And actually, can I just ask one more question? Sorry.
Yeah. No,
in terms of like thinking about like sustainability in terms of like environmental, ethical and economic ways, do you like judge that against any kind of matrix, or is it a gut feeling?
Well, there are plenty of matrices. What's the plural of matrix? Anyway, there are plenty of guides around that kind of thing. I mean, there are websites like Ethical Consumer, for example, where you can compare products if you're buying like materials for things or a new laptop or various things like that. A lot of it is a gut feeling. A lot of it is also just using recycled materials and sourcing things that way where possible, not buying through Amazon, etc. Even though I'm terrible at buying through Amazon because they're so useful for workshop materials. So yeah, it's never perfect, but I always try and kind of balance it out as much as possible. Yeah, there's all sorts that you can go down crazy rabbit holes with. I remember on the masters we had to do a whole module and a whole essay report on the minerals in a laptop and explore like where each mineral is sourced from and just all the kind of like the kind of blood diamond sort of thing. It's like that with all the minerals. It's exhausting, it really is. But fascinating as well. So I think just, yeah, again, the drawing your boundaries thing, you can't go down all those rabbit holes. So as much as possible, I just try and source secondhand materials or design the project which can be reused. And also with digital fabric printing, I try and use printers that have like eco inks and are sustainable. And actually even the process of digital fabric printing is supposed to be more sustainable than general fabric printing because you can print like within the shape and there's not waste ink and things like that. And I always design it according to like the width of the fabrics. There's no wastage and stuff like that. So it's just trying to bed in where you can. But yeah, you really do start going completely mad if you think about all of it.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, thanks, Jack.
For bricks artists, we're a bit few on the ground today, but I wondered whether there would be an interest in trying to get some training for people around, you know, the various things that we've discussed, working with communities.
Yeah, that would be amazing. I think there's a real gap in the kind of art world at the moment for training like that. And I mean, I ask that question, Jack, basically at all other like creative talks I attend where other artists are sharing their practice and talk about, you know, how you can protect yourself from that vulnerability, or from that information even. And no one really has an answer. It really is something that I think, I mean, people are certainly researching it and writing about it. A friend of mine is doing a PhD on practices of care in the art world, but more in terms of how institutions support their staff. But yeah, it's definitely a real need, I think. And there are lots of other artists I know who'd jump at the chance to come to training like that. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, that'd be great.
Okay, well, if no one else has any other questions, I need to stop sitting in this position at this time of day because I can't see anything now because it's light. Thank you very much, Ellie. That was really interesting. And thanks everyone else for coming. Next week at the same time, we have Claire Thatcher, who will be doing a demonstration and a talk showing us how she makes pigments for her oil paintings, which will be really interesting. So it's the same link on Zoom, which you can access through our website.
Great. Thank you, guys.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Bye.